Hello, all you wizards and witches and all you in-betweens. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm the wizard. My name is Ronan, and today's subject is going to be a little bit grim, but it is about our ancestors within witchcraft and the persecution. This particular video is going to be about the Salem witch trials, and I think it's important that we know our roots, know what our ancestors went through. It wasn't a really good time. But anyways, trying to keep these videos short so we can get around and cook dinner and wash laundry and all that stuff. I'm going to jump right into this. The Salem witch trials took place in Salem in the Massachusetts Bay Colony between 1692 and 1693. Historians believe the accused witches were victims of a mob mentality, mass hysteria, perhaps scapegoating, which is probably all more than likely true. In my personal opinion, do I think that a lot of these people were witches? They probably were not. But who's to say? Out of a couple hundred people, there's probably a percentage that actually were witches, but nevertheless, they sought us down. I'm going to be making another video with the burning times in Europe, which gets into more detail about how witches within witchcraft have been persecuted for all these years. But the Salem witch trials began in January of 1692 after a group of girls began behaving strangely, and a local doctor ruled that they were bewitched. The girls then accused a local slave, Titubia, and two other women of bewitching them. When Titubia was arrested a few days later, confessed she was a witch, and stated there were other witches in Salem, the colonists panicked and began a massive witch hunt to find these other witches. Many historians believe that a number of individuals in the colony, particularly the Putnam family, quickly took advantage of the witch hunt and a mass hysteria by accusing rival neighbors or other colonists that they disapproved of or wanted revenge against, which is highly likely in and of itself. Puritans were very hostile towards colonists who didn't follow the strict religious and social rules in the colony. As a result, it is not surprising that many of the accused witches were outspoken women, Quakers, slaves, colonists with criminal backgrounds and or prior witchcraft accusations, or colonists who criticized the witch trials. Hey, you know what? If you thought it was unjust charging, trying, and executing people because they were accused of a witch, and you stood up against this type of thing, you could be accused of being a witch and hanged, hung, as it were. So some of the above information is according to the Society societal historical of crime and punishment in America, which, you know, I'll leave that where it is. Alright, so how many people died in the Salem witch trials? Well, the official death count for the Salem witch trials is 20 people. 19 victims were hanged at Proctor's Ledge near Gallows Hill, and one person was tortured to death during the Salem witch trials. 4 people also died in prison while awaiting trial. The other victims were either found guilty but pardoned, found not guilty, were never indicted, evaded arrest, or escaped from jail. So, how many people were accused during the Salem witch trials? Well, according to various sources, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. Not everyone who was accused was pursued by authorities or arrested, though. Between 140 and 150 people were arrested for witchcraft during the witch hunt. Some of the count records have been lost over the years, but the following is almost an almost complete list of the victims arrested for witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. So, you know, what I would like to do is, you know, I would like to stick with, in this video, I would like to stick with the ones that were found guilty and executed. You know, if you were charged with this crime erroneously, I'm sure it was a hard time for you in your life and whatnot. But you know, if you weren't executed, if you were not hung by the neck or you know, burned at the stake or something, which they did not burn at the stake in Salem, that's a misconception. But you know, I'm just going to stick to these individuals that were found guilty and then executed for the sake of time, but that it in no way diminishes the other people that unfortunately were accused of this type of crime. But so first, Bridget Bishop. She was in her 50s. Bridget Bishop was a widow who lived in Salem town. Bishop had a bad reputation around town because she had been accused of witchcraft years before and had frequent run-ins with the law. She wasn't the first person accused during the Salem witch trials, but she was the first person tried because it was believed the case against her was easy to win. Would have been easy to win. Interesting. She was brought to trial on June 2nd, found guilty, and became the first person executed during the witch trials when she was hanged on June 10, 1692. Sarah Good, age 39. Sarah Good lived in Salem Village and was the wife of William Good. At the time of the witch trial, she was poor and pregnant and would often go door to door in Salem Village begging for handouts while her husband worked as a day laborer. She was one of the first people accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials, along with Sarah Osborne and Titubia. When the affected girls first began showing symptoms that they were bewitched, the girls accused the 3 women of bewitching them, as I, alluded to, of the first women arrested. Sarah Good was brought to trial June 29 and executed on July 19, 1692. The next female was Elizabeth Howe. She was age 57. Elizabeth Howe lived in Topsfield and was the wife of a farmer, James Howe. Much like Bridget Bishop, Howe had also been accused of witchcraft before. In her previous case, she was accused of bewitching a local girl. No charges were ever brought up against her. Howe now was later refused admittance to an Ipswich church due to the incident in May of 1692. She was accused of witchcraft by the afflicted girls in the Salem village. She was arrested, brought to trial on June 29, and executed on July 19, 1692. Susanna Martin, age 71. Susanna Martin was a poor widow who lived in Amesbury at the time of the Salem witch trials. Much like Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin had also been accused of witchcraft before. In her previous cases, she was accused of infanticide and tormenting people with her specter. The charges were eventually dropped or dismissed. Martin was accused of witchcraft by the afflicted girls, in the spring of 1692. Susanna Martin was taken to Salem Village, brought to trial on June 29th, and executed on July 19, 1692. Moving on, we have Rebecca Nurse, age 71. Rebecca Nurse was an elderly grandmother from Salem's village and the wife of farmer Francis Nurse. She was a pious and popular woman who had a long-standing feud with the Putnam family that was mentioned earlier, over border boundaries between their adjoining land. She also disapproved of the controversial appointment of Samuel Parris, whom was a close friend of the Putnams, as the new Salem village minister. The Putnams were Rebecca Nurse's main accusers during the witch trials, and many of them testified against her. Rebecca Nurse was originally found not guilty at the end of her trial in late June, but when the verdict was read out loud in the court, the afflicted girls protested and the jury was asked to reconsider its decision. The jury reconsidered and came back with a guilty verdict. Rebecca Nurse was executed on July 19, 1692. Sarah Wiles, age 65. Sarah Wiles lived in Topsfield and was the wife of a local judge, John Wiles. Sarah Wiles had somewhat of a bad reputation due to previous brushes with law. In 1649, she was accused of fornicating out of wedlock with Thomas Wardell, and in 1663, she was accused of wearing a silk scarf. After she married widower John Wiles in 1663, John Gould and Mary Gould Reddington, the brother and sister of John Wiles' late wife, developed a hatred of Sarah Wiles, and in 1607 began spreading rumors that she was a witch. The rumors continued for years until an angry Sarah Wiles physically attacked Mary Gould Reddington on the road one day, pulling her off her horse and throwing her to the ground. Even after Mary Gould Reddington passed away from natural causes years later, Mary's friends continued to harass and torment Sarah Wilds. The Gould family were close friends with the Putnam family of Salem Village. Shortly after the Salem witch hunt began, in March of 1692, the Putnam family accused Sarah Wilds of witchcraft in April of 1692, and she was arrested. John Wilds' daughter from a previous marriage and son-in-law, Sarah and Edward Bishop, were also arrested, as was John's other daughter, Phoebe Wilds. Sarah Wilds was brought to trial on June 29, and she was executed on July 19, 1692. So, moving on, we have, we have a male coming up, and his name is his name was Reverend George Burroughs, and his age was, he was in his 40s. No one knows really from those days, but he was in his 40s. A young man by today's standards. George Burroughs was the only Putnam minister to be accused and executed during the Salem witch trials. Burroughs was a minister in Casco, Maine during the 1670s, but left the settlement after it was attacked by Native Americans. He later settled in Salisbury, Mass. For a while before being asked to serve as the new minister in Salem Village in 1680. The residents of Salem disagreed over his appointment as minister, and he was not always paid his salary. He often borrowed money from the Putnam family to support his family. When he stopped being paid altogether, he left Salem and returned to Maine. At some point, the Putnam family sued Burroughs for failure to repay his debt, and shortly after accused him of witchcraft. Burroughs was arrested, brought to trial on August 5th, and executed on August 19, 1692. Martha Carrier, age 33. Martha Carrier lived in Andover and was the wife of Thomas Carrier. Carrier was also the niece of outspoken opponent of the Salem witch trials, Reverend Francis Dane of Andover, and the sister of accused witch Mary Toothacker of Billerica. Carrier was the first person in Andover accused during the Salem witch trials. She was accused by her neighbor Benjamin Abbott, after the two had a dispute over land, and Abbott immediately fell ill. Her children were also accused and were coerced into testifying against her. Coerced into testifying against their own mother. Wow. Carrier was brought to trial on August 5th, and she was executed on August 19, 1692. John Willard. His age was about 30. He is about 30 years old. John Willard was a deputy constable in Salem at the time of the Salem witch trials. He was one of the first people in Salem to speak out against the witch trials. Willard was responsible for helping to arrest the accused witches, but soon began to doubt so many people could be guilty of witchcraft and quit his job in protest. Shortly after, Willard himself was accused of witchcraft by Ann Putnam Jr., there's that name again, who also accused him of beating her baby sister to death. Willard was not immediately arrested, but his in-laws The Wilkins family began to grow suspicious of him. Willard was accused a second time by his wife's grandfather, Bray Wilkins. After Wilkins fell ill upon receiving a cross look from Willard on May of 1692, just a few days later, Bray's grandson, Daniel Wilkins, was found dead, his body bloody and beaten. And according to court records, to the best of our judgments, we cannot but apprehend that he died an unnatural death by some cruel hands of witchcraft or diabolical act. And, the restaurant goes on, let's see. Unfortunately, John Willard was brought to trial on August 5th and executed on August 19, 1692. And the next male, George Jacobs Sr., age 72. George Jacobs Sr. was accused of witchcraft by several people during the Salem witch trials, including his granddaughter, Margaret Jacobs. He was a reluctant churchgoer and was an outspoken critic of the Salem witch trials. Could be dangerous back in those days. He was first accused by his servant, Sarah Churchill, who also accused the granddaughter Margaret Jacobs. His son, George Jacobs Jr., was accused as well, but he evaded arrest. Many testified against George Jacobs Sr., including almost all the members of the Putnam family. He was found guilty on August 5th and executed on August 19, 1692. Jacob's family reportedly retrieved his body from the execution site and buried him on the family property. So John Proctor, age 61. John Proctor was a wealthy farmer who lived on the outskirts of Salem Village. He was an outspoken critic of the Salem witch trials and often threatened to beat or whip the afflicted girls for their role in the witch trials. After his wife Elizabeth Proctor was arrested on charges of witchcraft in April of 1692, the afflicted girls turned on John Proctor during Elizabeth's examination and accused him as well. John Proctor's entire family was eventually arrested on charges of witchcraft. Proctor knew Salem was in the midst of a mass hysteria and wrote a letter to the Boston clergy in July asking that they intervene or move the trials to Boston. The clergy responded, but it was too late to save Proctor, who was brought to trial on August 5th and executed on August 19, 1692. His remaining family members were either never charged or found guilty and pardoned. Proctor's body was reportedly retrieved from the execution site and secretly buried on his farm. Next we have Alice Parker. Her age is unknown. Alice Parker was the wife of a fisherman, John Parker. The couple lived in Salem town, where Alice was known as a pious, honest woman. Parker also had a reputation for clairvoyance and on one occasion successfully predicted that a friend's husband had died at sea. In May of 1692, afflicted girl Mary Warren suddenly accused Alice Parker of witchcraft. During Parker's trial, Warren made several surprising accusations against her, claiming Parker bewitched her mother to death, made her sister ill, and drowned several men and boys in the sea. including a man named Tommen Westgate and his entire crew, who drowned after their ship sank. Alice Parker was brought to trial on September 9 and executed on September 22nd, 1692. We also have Mary Parker around the age of 40. Mary Parker was the widow of Andover Parker, was accused by Sarah Phelps and Martha Sprague of Andover. It is not known why the women accused her, but Mary Parker stated during her examination that there was another woman in Andover named Mary Parker, and suggested it was a case of mistaken identity. Martha Sprague then stated that the woman in front of her was the woman who afflicted her. Mary Parker was brought to trial on September 17th and executed on September 27, 1692. The next female that we have was Anne Predator, age 70s. Anne Predator was a widow who lived in Salem town, where she also worked as a nurse and midwife. She had a reputation for being sharp-tongued and often quarreled with locals. She was accused of witchcraft in May of 1692 by Sarah Churchill and several other afflicted girls of Salem village. Some of her medical supplies, such as Funt ointments, were confiscated and introduced to the court as objects of the occult. During her trial, Predator accused many of her accusers of lying. Predator was brought to trial on September 9 and executed on September 22, 1692. Next we have Wilmot Red, age unknown. Wilmot Red lived in Marblehead and was the wife of fisherman Samuel Red. Like Bridget Bishop and many other witch trial victims, Wilmot Red had also been accused of witchcraft before in 1687. She was an unpopular person around town because she often quarreled with others and had an abrasive personality. Red's daughter was the wife of fellow accused witch Reverend George Burroughs. Red was accused of witchcraft in May of 1692 by the Salem village afflicted girls and brought into Ingalls Road Tavern in Salem village for her examination. She had never met the afflicted girls before, and when asked why they were afflicted, she stated that they were in a sad condition. She was indicted, and several Marblehead residents testified against her. Red was brought to trial on September 17th and executed on September 22nd, 1692. Very sad. Margaret Scott, age 77. Margaret Scott was a widow from Rowley. Scott had 7 children, but only 3 survived childhood. After her husband died in 1671, Scott was left destitute and forced to beg from her neighbors. This made her unpopular with her neighbors. Scott was accused by 2 of Rowley's most notable families, the Wickhams and the Nelsons. A member of the Nelson family also sat on the grand jury that convicted her. Scott was brought to trial on September 17th and executed on September 27, 1692. Next we have Samuel Wardwell, Sr., age 49. Samuel Wardwell was a Quaker and a carpenter from Andover, and he was also well known fortune teller and practitioner of English folk magic. It is believed that his work in the occult, as well as his status as a Quaker, led to his witchcraft accusation. Wardwell was accused by Martha Spragg of Broxford in August of 1692, arrested and jailed in Salem. Shortly after, his wife and daughters were also arrested. During his examination, he admitted to fortune-telling and dabbling in magic and said that the devil may have taken advantage of him for these reasons. He then confessed to making a pact with the devil, but later recanted his confession. Wardwell was brought to trial on September 17th and executed on September 27, 1692. Next we have Martha Corey, age 72. Martha Corey lived in the outskirts of Salem Village and was the wife of a wealthy farmer, Giles Corey. Corey had a reputation for being a pious member of the community despite the well-known fact that she had a child out of wedlock in the 1670s. Martha Corey was also an outspoken critic of the Salem witch trials and stated many times that the afflicted girls were liars. During her own examination, she told the judge, "We must not believe all that these distracted children say." In March, Giles Corey testified against his wife in court, stating that she may have bewitched his farm animals and himself. When Giles Corey himself was accused of witchcraft and arrested in April, he refused to provide any more information on Martha or himself. Martha Corey was brought to trial on September 9th and executed on September 27, 1692, just 3 days after Giles Corey had been tortured to death for refusing to enter a plea. So, if you did not admit to witchcraft, they would torture you until you did, and then they would execute you. So, what a wonderful world. So, next we have Mary Etsy. She was age 58. Mary Etsy was the sister of accused witches Rebecca Nurse and Sarah Cloyce. She lived in Topsfield and was considered a pious, well-respected member of the community. In April of 1692, Mary Etsy was accused of witchcraft, arrested, but was then released in May. She was accused again a few days after her release and rearrested. She was examined and indicted on 2 charges of witchcraft. Esty was brought to trial on September 9th and executed on September 22nd, 1692. So the next one, this was Corey Giles. He was one that I remember really from history, going back a lot of years ago. I don't know, I was a kid or whatever, but that name stuck in my mind. He was age 71. He was one of the males that refused to enter a plea and was tortured to death. Very sad thing. Giles Corey was a wealthy farmer who lived on the outskirts of Salem Village. He had a reputation for being an angry, violent man and was once charged with murdering his farm hand in 1676. He was found guilty but only suffered a fine for his actions. Many locals, including Thomas Putnam, suspected Corey had paid a bribe for his freedom. In April of 1692, Giles Corey was accused of witchcraft after his wife, Martha Corey, had also been accused and arrested on the same charge. Giles Corey refused to enter a plea in an attempt to prevent his case from going to trial. He reportedly knew he was going to die, either in jail or on the gallows, and he wanted to avoid being convicted before he did. As a result, Giles Corey was tortured for 3 days in a field on Howard Street in Salem Town in an attempt to force a plea out of him. He died on the 3rd day of his torture on September 9, 1692. So, a few people that died in prison: Sarah Osborne, I don't have a date of birth, but she died in jail in Boston on May 10, 1692. Roger Toothacker died in jail in Boston on June 16, 1692. Anne Foster died in jail on December 3rd, 1692. Lydia Dustin died in jail on March 10th, 1693. Excuse me. We have a cold front coming through with a lot of moisture and rain, and it's got my sinuses going. I apologize. So these people were lucky enough to escape from prison and ultimately escape their own deaths, at least from execution in the Salem witch trials, which I believe is lucky for them. Escape from prison: John Alden Jr., Edward Bishop Jr., Sarah Bishop, Mara Bradbury, William Barker Sr., Andrew Carrier, Catherine Carey, Philip English, Mary English, Edward Farrington, 2 men evaded arrest: George Jacobs Jr., Daniel Andrews. There were 2 other victims, and these were 2 dogs who were shot or killed after being suspected of witchcraft. So the victims of the Salem witch trials, due to the large number of the accused witches, just the sheer number of them, the prisoners were kept in multiple jails in Salem, Ipswich, and Boston. According to the book, A Delusion of Satan, the full story of the Salem witch trials, the accused witches were considered dangerous prisoners and were kept in dungeons underneath the jails, away from the regular prisoners. So, how were the Salem witch trial victims executed? Well, the executions took place on a small hill called Proctor's Ledge at the base of the gallows hill in Salem Town. The victims were hanged by the neck by a rope tied to a tree. And where were the Salem witch trial victims buried? Well, After each execution took place, the victim's body was cut down and placed in a nearby rock crevice or buried in a shallow grave somewhere on the execution site. As convicted witches, they were not allowed a Christian burial in consecrated ground. Relatives of several victims, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, and George Jacobs, reportedly retrieved the bodies of their loved ones and gave them a Christian burial on their family property. It is not known what happened to the unclaimed bodies or if there were any unclaimed bodies, but if there are, they are most likely still buried in shallow graves at the execution site. So, this video was just really, it was to, for younger witches and wizards that may not know these stories because of the way history gets rewritten, things get taken out of history, or maybe even for some older witches and wizards that may not have heard this story. I think it pays homage to our ancestors, and to these people, whether or not they were witches or wizards or not. They were accused of witchcraft, and I just think it pays them due respect to have their names mentioned all these years later again by somebody like me that really, who am I? I'm just a regular person, but to have their story told after all these years again, whether or not they were decent people while they lived in this lifetime, in my understanding of spirituality, if they have already recycled and went around again, they're smiling down on me. I don't know, when I rewatch this video, maybe I'm gonna see some orbs flying around, I don't know, but if something like this would have happened to me and somebody hundreds of years later was, just an average guy on YouTube that's making some, video and is telling my story again, I think it would wake me up, whatever realm I'm in, or dimension, or even if I've been reincarnated already, maybe it would, my subconscious would pick up on this somehow. But anyways, I didn't do this for any self-recognition or anything. It's just simply for it's a part of our history within witchcraft, and it's things that may have happened to those of us, that would be within witchcraft. And I've got there, of course, there, a lot of people know, there are some that probably do not know, but there were some very infamous cases of these just crazed people in Europe having witch hunts, and and they were called, in witchcraft, they're called the burning times. And I think it would do justice to do a video on that in remembrance of some of those people. I don't know if the viewers out there finds this type of thing interesting or not, but You know, anytime you're finding out about your past, your heritage, your roots, your ancestors, I I I, I would think that would be interesting. Um, there's also, and I'm gonna wrap this video up because I know it's running pretty long. There also, and this is not as common knowledge, but within the United States, before the United States was even a colony, it's when France still owned a big chunk of the United States, all the way from Mexico up to Canada. There were colonists here. There were no colonies, but these people were from all over the world, really, but a lot from Europe, and a lot of them had settled in the Appalachian Mountains, the Ozark Mountains, which is very interesting to me, and I think I would really like to do a video on that because I'm a Southerner, if you haven't already determined with my Southern accent. Um, this practice of magic and witchcraft was very, very prevalent, and until this day is practiced in the Appalachian Mountains and the Ozark Mountains. So you know what? That would be a very interesting video. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative for you, and um, I'd like to thank all you witches and wizards and all you in-betweens. I'm the wizard. My name is Ronan Ide. Thank you for viewing my video. Sending you many blessings.